He was 26 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office, signing papers for a trust fund worth more than most people see in 10 lifetimes. And the first thing his father said to him afterward wasn't congratulations. It was, don't tell anyone the number. That's it. That was the whole lesson. No hug, no pride, just a rule. And it turns out that's how it works in almost every wealthy family you've ever heard of. There's a rule book, and nobody ever writes it down. If you want more stories about the secret playbooks rich people follow while telling everyone else to just work harder, subscribe. We've got a whole series on the stuff they don't teach in school, mostly because the people who know it don't want you to learn it for free. So here's the setup. Old money families, the kind with 3 generations of wealth behind them, don't operate like lottery winners or tech founders. They've had decades, sometimes centuries, to figure out how fortunes disappear, and fortunes disappear fast. There's a well-known finding in wealth research that 70% of rich families lose their wealth by the 2nd generation, and nearly 90% lose it by the 3rd. So somewhere along the way, the families who survived that math started building invisible systems, not laws, not contracts, rules, passed down at dinner tables, in cars, during arguments nobody else ever heard. And once you know what to look for, you start seeing them everywhere, in how these families raise their kids, spend their money, and talk about people who don't have any. Rule 1. Never let anyone know the real number. The first rule is simple. Nobody outside the family, sometimes nobody inside it either, gets to know exactly how much there is. Kids grow up in enormous houses without ever being told what the house is worth. They fly private without knowing what the flight costs. It's not modesty, it's strategy. Because the moment a number gets attached to a person, that person starts getting treated differently, by friends, by partners, by their own siblings. Wealthy families have watched what happens when the number leaks. Jealousy shows up, strangers show up, marriages built on money instead of love show up. So the number stays locked, sometimes even from the heirs themselves until they're deep into adulthood. One old money parent put it bluntly to their teenage kid, "You don't need to know how rich we are, you need to know how to work." And that sentence right there, that's the whole rule book in miniature. Rule 2, look poor, stay rich. Here's where it gets almost funny. You'd think growing up wealthy means driving something flashy at 16. In real old money households, it's the opposite. The families who keep their fortunes for generations are famous for driving unremarkable cars, wearing plain clothes, and avoiding logos entirely. Why? Because flash invites attention, and attention invites lawsuits, kidnappers, con artists, and freeloaders. There's a saying that circulates in wealth management circles: the rich who stay rich look boring on purpose. So while new money buys the loudest car on the block, old money buys a 15-year-old sedan and puts the difference into something that compounds quietly. It looks like humility from the outside. From the inside, it's pure defense. Rule 3, marriage isn't just marriage, it's a merger. This is the one nobody wants to say out loud, but everyone in these families understands it by the time they're old enough to date. Before a wedding happens, there's often a much quieter meeting first. Lawyers, accountants, sometimes a family council, working out a prenuptial agreement that protects generations of assets from a single relationship that might not last. It's not romantic, it's not supposed to be. One heir described being told, almost casually, over breakfast, "We like her. Now let's talk paperwork." And the wild part is, in these families, that sentence isn't seen as cold, it's seen as responsible. Because they've all watched a cousin, an uncle, a family friend lose half a fortune in a divorce that could have been prevented with one signature. So love comes first, but protection comes immediately after. Asterisk, asterisk. Rule 4, the money skips a generation, on purpose. Here's a twist a lot of people don't expect. In many wealthy families, the children of the person who built the fortune don't actually get direct control of it. The grandchildren do. Trusts get structured so that the money passes down, but the control stays locked for decades, sometimes released in stages at 25, 35, 45. Why skip ahead like that? Because the generation that grew up watching the fortune get built usually understands its value. The generation that grows up inside the fortune, surrounded by it, sometimes doesn't. So families build in delay on purpose, a kind of financial seatbelt, forcing heirs to prove themselves before the vault fully opens. One family patriarch reportedly told his son, who was furious about not getting immediate control, "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting you from yourself at 30. That sentence ended the argument. Nobody had a comeback for it. Rule 5. You don't talk about money at the table, you train for it. The last rule is the strangest one to outsiders. In most households, money is either avoided completely or talked about constantly out of stress. In wealthy families, it's treated like a subject you study, not something you casually discuss, but something you're drilled on. Kids sit in on portfolio reviews before they're teenagers. They're handed small amounts of money early and made to track every dollar. They're taught the difference between an asset and a liability before they're taught how to drive. It's not warm, it's not casual, it's training, disguised as childhood. And by the time these kids are adults, money isn't emotional to them anymore. It's just a tool they were taught to use, the same way some kids get taught to play piano, except the stakes are $100 million instead of a recital. The part nobody talks about. Here's what none of these families will say publicly. Every single one of these rules exists because of fear, not confidence. The silence about the number, the boring cars, the prenups, the delayed trusts, the early training, none of it comes from a place of security. It comes from watching other families lose everything and refusing to make the same mistakes. Wealth at that level isn't a comfort. It's a responsibility they were terrified of failing. And that fear gets passed down just as carefully as the money does. Dressed up as discipline, but underneath it, it's really just generational anxiety wearing a very expensive suit. So here's the twist. We think rich families are hiding their wealth to look modest, or to avoid taxes, or to seem relatable. That's not really it. They're hiding it because they've learned, generation after generation, that money left exposed gets taken by lawsuits, by bad marriages, by lazy heirs, by their own children's mistakes. The rules aren't about greed, they're about survival. And the real secret isn't that rich families have more money than you. It's that they were trained, from childhood, to treat money like a threat that needs managing, while the rest of us were trained to treat it like a reward we just have to wait for. And maybe that's the actual gap. Not the number in the bank account, but the fact that one group grew up being taught the rules of the game, while everyone else was just told to play harder and hope. Nobody hands you a trust fund lesson at the dinner table if you're not born into one. But now you've got 5 of theirs for free, which honestly feels like the first crack in the vault. If you want more of the quiet rules powerful families live by, the ones they'll never post on Instagram, subscribe. Because apparently the real flex isn't the money. It's making sure nobody outside the family ever finds out how much of it there really is.